Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today we are carrying on with our early off-season preview series, taking a look at each of the 30 teams in the NBA prior to the real start of sort of the off-season frenzy. Before the start of sort of major free agency plays, we're going to take a look at every team and ask a couple of questions about what they should be doing moving forward through this off-season. So today, we are going to be keying in on the Milwaukee Bucks, a team that honestly had championship aspirations this season and didn't quite measure up in the way that they were hoping for. But we'll get to that in just a moment. For now, let's take a look at some of the baseline stats here for the Bucks. You can see on the screen, record-wise, 58-24 in terms of that win-loss. That was good enough for the number one seed in the East. It also won them the Central Division. So, division champions, first seed in the Eastern Conference, they were feeling pretty good. Unfortunately, the wheels kind of fell off at that point. They go 1-4 in the playoffs and lose in the first round to the Miami Heat. So, not quite what they were hoping for. But in terms of stats for the team, you can also see 12th in the league in offensive rating, 4th in the league in defensive rating, so their defense really did kind of prop up the team quite nicely. Net rating sits at 5th in the league while playing with the 10th highest pace and having the 3rd highest payroll in the NBA. So they were a pretty solid team that fell short of expectations for sure, but the question now is, where do they go from there? And, well, now is probably a good time to talk about additions and losses for this team, because it is going to play a pretty large factor into some of the points that I have to talk about for the Bucks. So we'll throw those up on the screen for you as well. In terms of additions to this roster, as of right now, it's really just draft picks. They got Chris Livingston and Andre Jackson Jr. In the draft. Again, don't really know how big a role some of these guys will play, but they were technically added to the roster. And speaking of technicalities, technically in terms of off-season losses, Chris Middleton is going to be included in there. We had a similar situation in the Nuggets video. For just the sake of simplicity, I am going to be putting players who decline their player option or team option into the losses category. There is still a chance that Chris Middleton can re-sign with the Bucks on an entirely new contract, but for now, the declining of his player option, I'm going to count that as the team losing that player. So Chris Middleton is out, couple of draft picks in. That is all we have seen from the Bucks so far at this early point in the offseason. So with that in mind, we will get into some of our biggest questions for the Milwaukee Bucks here, and the first one is pretty relevant to what we were just saying. How do the Bucks actually handle the loss of Chris Middleton? So Chris Middleton opted to decline his player option. He turned down over $40 million to become a free agent. And as I mentioned just a little while ago, the Bucks could still re-sign him to a longer-term deal. That is always a possibility for them, but it seems unlikely that the Bucks will be able to sort of bring him back for significantly less than what he was going to be making in his player option anyway, right? Maybe he doesn't get the full $40 million, but you would assume if he turned down a $40 million player option, he is looking for something in a similar vein in terms of the yearly salary. So do the Bucks want to commit to paying him that much, or maybe even more moving forward, in order to keep the current core intact? Because there is an argument to be made for them doing that. At full strength, Chris Middleton was, or is, whichever, an all-star caliber player, right? His injury kept him out for a lot of this last season. We did see strong numbers from him in the playoffs, though, when they played up against the Heat, especially when they played without Giannis. Chris Middleton averaged 23.8 points, 6.4 rebounds, and 6.2 assists. on 46.5% shooting from the field, 40.6% shooting from 3-point range. Of course, they do end up losing that series anyway, but his numbers were good. The problem is that itself is kind of the problem, right? Without having Giannis there and healthy and playing, Chris Middleton really could not carry the squad all by himself. And normally you wouldn't see that as a big deal, right? Normally you can't hold it against a player that they don't play well enough to make up for the loss of Giannis Antetokounmpo. Very few players in the league can claim to be able to do that. So you wouldn't really hold it against him, Chris Middleton, for being the second option on this Bucks team, unless that second option is going to make $40+ million a year. Then you do sort of start to wonder a little bit. Add on to that the fact that Drew Holiday ended up really playing well in Chris Middleton's absence during the regular season, and honestly still put up some pretty solid numbers in the postseason once he returned. And now you're looking at Chris Middleton as a guy who maybe he's not even consistently the second option. Maybe Drew Holiday eats up some of his opportunities, and you have a guy who's going to drift between being second and third option on this Milwaukee Bucks team, at least offensively. And then that guy in a 2.5 kind of scenario is going to be making $40 million a year. It's a tough ask for a team to throw that kind of money at a player who is not your clear-cut second guy behind Giannis. So how they handle Chris Middleton, I think, is going to be interesting. A lot of this might just come down to what offers he gets from other teams, right? You assume he declines his player option because he wants to test the open market, so the open market will, therefore, determine his value. So the Bucks are going to be keeping a very watchful eye on that, I'm sure, as the offseason gets further underway. But that is our first question done and dusted. That moves us on to question number 2. This one is a little bit of a follow-up to question 1, and that question is Giannis committed to this team long term? Now, I know that question does maybe seem a little bit silly if you were asking it last year or even a couple of months ago, and it's a far off future sort of issue because Giannis is still under contract for 2 more seasons this upcoming season, the one after that, and then has a player option for a 3rd season beyond that point. But technically speaking, I think starting in December he would be extension eligible. Excuse me. He would basically eat that player option year and turn that into part of the extension instead. So it's not too early for Giannis and the Bucks to be thinking about his future with this team, and that's where we get to the team's current situation. They fell well short of their expectations this season. They were the 1st seed in the East. They won their division handily. They were looking at a genuine championship run here. Instead, they failed to advance out of the 1st round of the playoffs, even though Giannis missed time in those playoffs. Chris Middleton missed extended time in the regular season. So there's an argument to be made here that the team could have done better if all of their players were healthy the whole way through. If Middleton had played the whole regular season, if Giannis had been able to play the full series against the Heat. Sort of similar to what was going on with the Nuggets. We mentioned that in their video. They stuck to it when players were hurt, when their lineup was not 100%. They had the mindset of, once we are all healthy and all ready to play, the roster as constructed is going to work. The Bucks could be thinking similar things. The problem is we may not get to see that scenario actually play out again on the court, where all of their players are healthy and available. Not because they won't be healthy, but because they simply may not be on the roster. As we mentioned repeatedly now, Chris Middleton declined his player option. He is a free agent. Re-signing him is absolutely an option for the Bucks, but it is definitely not guaranteed. He could very well go somewhere else. Brook Lopez, their starting center, and honestly, pretty much the focal point of their defense a lot of the time, is a free agent right now, and not only appears to be garnering interest from other teams out there who are looking at his size, his length, his experience, and definitely wanting to add that to their teams, but he is guaranteed to command more than what his price tag was last season. He was paid $13.9 million from the Bucks the previous campaign, he's going to make more than that. There's no way that, unless Lopez intentionally decides to take less money to help whatever team he goes to, he should be able to get more than that, which means the Bucks would have to pay more than that in order to try and keep him. So that leaves us with a little bit of a problem, because the Bucks then have Drew Holiday, Bobby Portis, Grayson Allen, and Pat Connaughton as the main guys who are currently signed, working around Giannis Antetokounmpo. So those aren't bad players. That's not a bad start in terms of putting guys around Giannis, but with Middleton and Lopez gone, you are missing 2/3 of what has been the core for the Bucks for a little while here. So now the question is, does Giannis have faith that the Bucks will either re-sign those guys that they need or bring in equivalent big names to build another contender alongside him? And if he doesn't think that that can happen, if this offseason does not play out to his liking, maybe Giannis starts eyeing a potential move away from the Bucks in the future. Maybe he starts looking to the tail end of his contract as a means of potentially exploring other options. I know that's not what Buck fans want to hear, but that's the reason why they've got to try and build something around Giannis right now. You can't afford to let him start wondering, if the grass is greener on the other side somewhere else. So definitely something the Bucks are going to have to worry about this offseason. There's still plenty of time and a fair bit of cap space for them to work with, presumably to re-sign some of those guys or bring someone new in, but they're going to have to do something relatively soon. But that does it for the second point. That moves us on to question number 3. And question number 3 is not really a question, more of a statement. But that statement is that the Bucks need to maintain their strength on the defensive end. Right? I mentioned it when we were sort of looking at the stats, the rundown initially in the regular season. The Bucks offense was not fantastic. I mean, it was good, right? It was in the top half of the league, but by offensive rating they were 12th. By defensive rating they were 4th. They were an elite defense, one of the best in the league, and regardless of what happens this offseason, they need to remain one of the best defensive teams in the league if they do want a shot at redemption and another chance to make that deep run into the playoffs. So they've got to be able to maintain that effort. Listing off some of the stats for that Bucks defense, they led the league in rebounding, 48.6 rebounds per game total. They had the second lowest opponent's field goal percentage allowed at just 45.6%, excuse me, all while committing the second fewest fouls per game, just 18.1 per game. So they played defense, they played tough defense, and they played clean defense, which is unbelievably rare in today's game. A lot of the times, if you are holding your opponents to lower percentages, you are also playing a relatively physical game. The Bucks managed to kind of avoid falling into that trap of fouling to prevent baskets. So they were an incredibly good defense, but maintaining that status as one of the league's best defenses, to me, really revolves around keeping the personnel who were responsible for that, right? You've got Giannis still in the lineup. You've got Drew Holiday still in the lineup. You've got Bobby Portis still in the lineup. They were all key pieces of that defense, and they are still there. But as I mentioned previously, the focal point of the squad's defensive efforts was Brook Lopez. And there's really no getting around that. Brook Lopez was the heart and soul of the Bucks defense, seemingly most of the time, not exclusively, obviously. They were able to play without him on occasion, but they would rather not, right? I mean, if you have one of the better defensive centers in the league, why would you want to have to play without him? And Brook Lopez now enters free agency. As we mentioned, he's gonna command more than the $13.9 million that he was given last season. So that's not great, but for the Bucks, it does get a little bit more worrisome. Compounding the team's defensive concerns is the fact that the squad's only other center on the roster outside of Brook Lopez, who's a free agent, is Myers Leonard, who is also not signed for next season. So as of right now, technically speaking, they have no centers on the roster from the previous season. To go even further than that, to add a little bit more if you weren't worried enough already. Giannis and Bobby Portis are the only two power forwards who are currently on the roster as well. So that means that you have a grand total of two guys to fill the power forward and center positions who are currently on the roster. And yeah, okay, sure, right? If you desperately needed to, Giannis plays the 4, Portis could play the 5, and there you go, you're set. But then you have no backups. You have no bench whatsoever in terms of your big men. And Giannis and Bobby Portis do not want to play 48 minutes a night. They should not have to play 48 minutes a night. So something needs to be done down low. The Bucks have to get someone. Hopefully it's Brook Lopez for them. Even if it isn't, though, they've got to go find somebody. They need some people to hold down the paint, both offensively and, more importantly, defensively. And honestly, I think they can do that without breaking the bank. Brook Lopez would be nice, but there are other centers you could go out and get who still have that size, who still have that length, who might honestly be duds on the offensive end, but I'm not really sure that's what you want them for. Brook Lopez was able to score when needed. He had a little bit of an ability to stretch the floor and shoot the 3. He didn't really do it crazy often, but it was part of his repertoire that the Bucks benefited from. Maybe you don't find that kind of shooting center on the open market, but the defense has to be the priority here. The offense is nice, but you need somebody down low. Otherwise, this team's defensive rating is going to slip pretty significantly. So we'll see what the Bucks look to do. Lots of concerns here. Got to figure out, what are we doing with Middleton? What are we building around Giannis? How are we going to stay a defensive powerhouse in this league? If they can answer all of those questions adequately, then I think this team makes another run. They get to the playoffs. They hopefully have Giannis healthy for those playoffs, and they definitely make it past just the first round. But if they don't have good answers to some of these questions, then things start to get a little bit iffy. Giannis could absolutely carry whatever this roster looks like to a playoff run, but they probably won't be the number 1 seed in that scenario, and they may not have the ability to get very far if it's just down to Giannis doing his own thing. So the Bucks have some serious questions. We'll have to wait and see what they do. Lots of potential free agent decisions for them to make. But that was going to do it for our early offseason preview for the Bucks. Let me know what you think. Do you believe they should spend the money to bring Chris Middleton back? Do you think Brook Lopez is as valuable as I sort of hyped him up to be? I genuinely do believe Brook Lopez is one of those guys who may not have the statistics to prove it, but I think he is one of the foundational pieces of the Bucks. And if he goes, this team is going to change dramatically. So, yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know if you have some other questions or concerns about the Bucks heading into this offseason that we didn't really cover here. And that'll be that. So, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.